You're listening to the Gender Reveal Party podcast. I'm your host, Jay Pryor. This isn't your usual gender reveal party. There will be no baby sex parts. This is the real reveal, where we reveal gender through stories of brave humans willing to share their lived experience. Enjoy the listening. I sure enjoy making it. Hi, and welcome back to the Gender Reveal Party. I'm your host, Jay Pryor, and I am here today with one of my longest term mentors, friends. Like, I just can't, I'm so happy to introduce you to my friend, Ann Thompson Cook. And we have known each other for over 20 years now. Wow. Right? And we met in Washington, D.C. And Ann is someone who, when we met, my memory is we met at a PFLAG. We met at a PFLAG meeting, and I had been asked to come to this PFLAG meeting to talk to some mothers of trans kids who were like they were like 18, 19 or 16, 17, something. And I remember vividly that these moms were, and this was, y'all have to remember, this is 1999, 2000, something like that. And these moms were having these kids transition, and these kids were mad at them that they couldn't get their pronouns right or their new names right. And so essentially I went and talked to them and just asked these women to give themselves some grace, because, you know, these kids have been thinking about this for a while, and they're like, got to get used to it. Right. And, you know, eventually to come around, because they were all trying really hard. Right. And so then afterwards you came up to me and you said something that at the time I did not understand. Right. And you said to me, I loved how you were being with them. And I didn't understand being when I met you. And so I was kind of like, okay, that's a cool thing to say. It intrigued me a lot. And then we became friends. We started educating together. And that's when I heard your story. And for me, people, I'm introducing you to the OG ally of the LGBTQ community. Like, you are, for me, the OG ally. Like, you are the one who paves the road for all other allies of the LGBTQIA plus community.
Jay,
You
I don't
have
know
been,
what OG means.
Original gangster is what it means, but it's like when you use OG, it's like you're the original, like you're the first, like you're the original ally from so far back. And so, like, when I met you and I'd found out that you had been an ally to queer people since like your kids were in elementary school, right? It was mind-blowing to me. I had never met somebody who was such a powerful ally. And today we talk about allyship, because now allyship is a thing that people are talking about in corporations and in, like, everywhere they're talking about allyship. And we talk about how allyship isn't talking about it, it's doing something about it. And you are the first person I ever met that was like really an ally, like really doing it. So, you know, like, who you are for me personally is this human who's my friend and taught me so much about transformation in life, and like who you are for our community. Holy smokes. You set the bar for allies. That's who you are for me.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for coming to the show and allowing me to introduce my audience to you.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this. I'm not someone who normally agrees to sit on the hot seat.
No, you're not. And that's another reason I really appreciate it.
But with you, I'm just looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. So would you share your story a little bit with our audience?
My story about allydom.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm 76. So when I started working on this was 19 in the mid 1980s. And at that time, How long ago was that? Can you do the math?
Yeah.
So at
I
that
was,
time,
yeah, I was like 15. So yeah, like 40 some years ago, 35, 40, 45
so
years.
yeah, so at that time, as you said, my kids were in elementary school and pretty much everyone was closeted and I was completely clueless.
Yeah.
Right? Like um I had a friend in Chicago and that I was in a women's group with. These are, I'm going to tell a couple stories I never mentioned. But we were in a women's group and she came out in the group as bisexual. And several years later, she told me that was the last meeting of the group. And she related it to her coming out as bisexual. And you know, I didn't know that.
Right.
And I also, I've probably never told you, when I was a social worker in Chicago, we moved to DC in 79. So during the 70s, I was a social worker and I worked in a child welfare agency. And one of the things they offered there was adoption services. And I had this guy come in who said he was pregnant and wanted to put the baby up for adoption. And I had no language for what I just like, that was probably early 70s.
Wow.
And he came in, we had meetings and I never found out exactly what happened, but no one in the agency knew why this kid was visiting me because we were, so apparently I was counseling a young Black boy, teenager. And so, I went to the hospital where he had an ultrasound and we confirmed that there was a baby. And I mean, I look back on how ignorant I was, but somehow he trusted me, So then when we got to DC, by the time we got to DC, I was shifting from social worker to writer. And I got a job with a sexuality education research group, and was doing editing and writing for them. I wrote a guide to designing and implementing sexuality education programs for teens and adults or something like that. And in the process of that, I read a comprehensive book on sexuality, which introduced me to the concept of homosexuality as normal, which up until then, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then the really pivotal thing was in the mid 80s when people started coming out to me. And that, you're right, my kids were in elementary school then, and they were telling me these stories of being rejected by their families and drug abuse and attempted suicides and pain. And, it's like coming out of the woodwork, talking to me about these things. There were several people, and I'm taking all this in, and I don't have a place to put it, but I have two boys and they're bringing their kids in and out of the house. And I find myself watching them and saying, one or more of these kids is likely to figure out that they're gay. By that time, I had some sense of this wasn't unusual and completely rare.
Right.
So
Yeah.
looking at these kids and saying, whoever is going to figure out that they're gay, nothing has changed since these adults' lives that they've been sharing with me. And I just got this bug in my ear that I was supposed to do something about that. Like, if nothing has changed, like I wanted these kids to have a different experience. And they weren't going to, because it was just like what they talked about. There was all this condemnation and fear about gay adults being pedophiles and recruiting children. that's where we were in the 80s. So
Yeah.
I spent a few years kind of avoiding it and pushing it away and saying, no, not me. What do I know? And then, it kept happening. And I finally took it on and got involved with affirmation, which was, we were going to the Methodist church that I introduced you to, Dumbarton.
Mm-hmm.
And the Methodist and most of in the mid 80s was when the Methodists and the Presbyterians and the Lutherans and the other denominations were figuring out that they needed to organize around this stuff. And so the Methodists decided that in 84, and in about 85 or 86, one of the people came to Dumbarton and said they would like us to consider being a welcoming congregation. And that was really interesting because the guy came to a annual planning meeting and made this request, and the congregation agreed to take it into consideration, and then nothing happened. And so I finally, went to the church council chair and said, what's going on with this? And it seems like we should be having some kind of study. And I got involved in that, and had, most of the people in the congregation were going like, why would we talk about this? We don't have anybody who's gay in the congregation, which wasn't true.
Right.
So that's when I really got started in earnest, is through church work. And then the Methodist group had a national conference, their first national conference, which David and my husband and I went to. And then I got asked to be on the board, and within a year or two, I mean, the co-founder of that group lived in DC, and he would come over to our house and we would strategize about how to have this movement that no one knew how to do.
Right.
And then there was a bigger meeting than that, where he was talking about none of the groups had any educational materials. And by that time I have been writing educational materials on sexuality, on abortion, on breast cancer, things related to sexual health, mostly. And so I said, well, I could do it. So that was when I wrote the very first guide to sexual orientation. But, during all of that, like, what really stands out to me especially in those early years, is how many people were so generous in sharing their lives with me. Like, I didn't get up to speed by myself. Like, right. I just was meeting people at I was going to, one time I went, I was a closeted straight person at a gay health conference. But I would put myself in position. That was the only time I was closeted. Usually people were sharing it with me because I seemed like I guess it seemed to them like it was worth it. And then when I was writing the materials, I set up these advisory groups of really, really special people who, helped me know what needed to be said and how to frame it. And
but that's the thing that, I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to highlight that I appreciate that you are like, highlighting these other people, but that's the whole point of allyship, is like, you put yourself in those positions and you went and sought out their experience and didn't speak for them. You know what I mean? It's like, there's this world of allyship now that people are pondering, like, how do I be an ally? I don't know how to do it. And that's when you've been doing it so beautifully for so long, and everything you're speaking to is like, for folks who are looking for a textbook how to be an ally, this is it right here. Right. So I want you to get back to your story.
Just say one other piece is that when I wrote the first book, the first guide, which was on sexual orientation, I literally had the words that everybody is born male or female.
Right.
And that book was published in January 1991.
Oh.
And then I began to realize after that, it was when I began to realize, wait a minute, like in kindergarten playgrounds, when kids are getting teased, and you're gay and ick and stuff, it's not because of how they were being sexual, it's about how they were being gender. Yes. How they were being boys or girls.
Yeah.
And I realized I had a lot to learn about that. Like I just really, it was not on my radar. So then I started asking questions. Like I knew people like Kathy Renna, for example, you may know, she's a communications specialist, long time. And she dressed in boys' clothes. I think she was and is female identified, but I haven't kept up with that. So I talked with a lot of people like that, and they were very, I just said, I need to know more about this. And I talked to enough people that one time there was a United Church of Christ Washington office had a senior person who was probably 50s or I don't know how old, but starting to come out as a trans woman, selectively and mostly presenting as male, but starting to let people know that wasn't actually who I am. Mm-hmm. So that person got wind of what I was up to, trying to educate myself. And this was, just so useful, introduced me to this group that was meeting at a Unitarian church, like on a weekday evening, and people would come and dress in the bathrooms, and then they would have a meeting, and no one got to come to these meetings. It was very confidential and private. And this person from the UCC had vouched for me, and they allowed me to come to their meetings and just listen. And that's all I did, was just listen. And I had a lot of, that opened up a lot. Like I started going to some gender conferences, and it's really helpful. Like I did the same thing with the African-American community when I was working on trying to alter, like I was executive director of a national organization on abortion rights that was it was by design basically a white organization, and I was trying to change that picture from a historically white organization to one that represented. I was saying to the board, we can't fulfill our mission this way as a white organization.
Right.
So I was talking with a lot of, especially African-American women, about what are the barriers to your participation in this. And the narrow focus on abortion was a barrier. The top leadership of white people was a barrier. So I just set about to change all that. But in the meantime, I started going to places where I was one of the few white people, and I was listening to what the conversation is when it was mostly Black people. It's the same thing with the gender and the same thing with the gay. So I had to, after I wrote and published the book on gender difference, I went back to the one on sexual orientation and revised it. So it didn't say everyone, I had to tease out for the reader, this is sexual orientation, this is gender, but where things are now. Those guides are so out of date for what people are actually revealing, as like you, about the journey of it all, and
you
the
think
gender.
Well, first of all, I want to make sure our audience understands that, like, the books, at least the guides that what you're referring to, are very pointedly for congregations, right? For church conversations, which I think still, especially in certain parts of the country, are still in 1988. like there's still a lot of them that are still in that conversation. And it feels like we're moving backwards in our country sometimes too.
Absolutely.
And churches are the place, and you and I've said this and we've talked about it. Like for me, the other reason that your work is so important is because it focuses on church, and church, having my religion literally, how I felt like it was just taken away from me was one of the most painful things for me about coming out. Like coming out as a lesbian when I did, in the mid 80s. I came out in 1985. And so, I had when I had a priest tell me you cannot take communion to somebody who is diehard Catholic like me, you basically just said you're excommunicated and ripped my religion away from me. And so having congregations actually have this and meeting a congregation that was welcoming, I think you're saving lives and reuniting families with that. And I still think it's a viable resource for a lot of people. So I don't know if you have that experience or not, but
Yeah, no, I get it. That's why I did all the work in the context of religion, is that was the problem.
right. Religion is the problem. Right.
Yeah. So, I'm not that churchy, as you know by
Right.
now.
Exactly. You're not a church person even, really.
So, but I did dwell in that arena for a long, long time, educating. What I was referring to was more the experience of people about gender is more nuanced and more complicated than what I was hearing from people when I was doing that writing.
Right.
So it's not that the audience is still struggling with, I just don't understand.
Right. No, I get it now. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
The other thing, Jay, like I did write it with cisgender straight people in mind.
Yeah.
But
Right.
the feedback that I've got, the feedback that I've gotten from non-cisgender, non-hetero people who picked up the book and said, I found this when I was really struggling to figure out about myself, and it just,
Yeah.
it set me on a journey. And as you said, the families, like one trans woman said she had been sending materials to her dad for several years and he wouldn't talk to her. And she sent him the Made in God's Image was the one on gender. And
Right.
She sent him that, and he picked up the phone and called her and said, I'd like to come visit you. So did you hear this story before?
No, that's a brilliant one. I've heard a lot of your stories, but I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, that was very moving for me. And that was why I wrote the gender one, is that people were using articles, scientific articles and medical articles that appeared to validate, but it didn't move people off where they were.
Right.
It's like it didn't make a difference, which
Right.
is why I felt like after I'd spent so much time with people around the gender, the experience they were having of gender. And I had a lot of conversations with people about those experiences that I had been, gifted with.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew what made a difference and where people were stuck and what were the barriers to their kind of opening the door for that experience. So that's what made it possible to write those, because I was bridging.
Right. Well, and that's what an ally does, because you're in the community that has the power to bridge, right? And so being a cis, heterosexual white woman, like you had that power and you used that power for good. And I think that's where we're right now as queer activists. We're trying to empower, or part of our goal is to empower all people who have power, right, to be allies, whether we're white allies trying to, being allies to people of color, or whether cisgender people and or heteronormative people, all of that, all of us have some point of power. And so, what you've always done is use your point of power to be a bridge and to be of service and to save lives. Like those books, I can totally see how, I know you wrote them for the congregation and for them to wake up, but really I could totally see how if somebody had handed me Man in God's Image when I was 19, 18 or 17, I might not have tried to kill myself. Like I had somebody else telling me that God still loves me, that would have been a different conversation. So that's where it's like, yeah, I know you're saving lives when it gets in the hands of the queer people who have been told they're going to, like I was, that you're going to hell or whatever it is, that God stopped loving you the minute you became a homosexual or something crazy like that. So yeah, thanks for the work.
That power thing was, I had to be told that. Like I was doing workshops and stuff with gay and lesbian people who weren't necessarily in the early days, who weren't necessarily outing themselves. And so I wasn't either. And my lesbian friends were going like, you have to say out loud who you are, because that's part of the power of you being here. Like,
right.
So, I mean, though I had to be taught all those lessons. Yeah.
Yeah. And now that's part of the, ally, you could do an ally training in a second, right? Because that's what's going on right now. Is there's lots of those kind of trainings out there now, how to be an ally.
Yeah, that's a word I resisted for decades. I mean,
yeah, say more about that.
Letting you call me that, but
okay, tell me more about that. Say more about that.
Because I'm in it, because this affects me. Like
right.
It affects all of us.
Right.
That this is going on.
Yeah.
And so I don't experience myself as an ally, like I'm part of it. I'm part of the issue. But I get it. And when I first started, I was impatient with people who were clueless. Having just been clueless myself. I was so I was impatient. I was judgmental. I was and that's the problem for an ally, is like, to me, the most important thing is that I remember being clueless. So when I'm talking to somebody who's clueless, like I'm just talking to myself, an earlier version of myself.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing that is happening with anti-racism, that people suddenly get informed about our history and the way the systems participate in the outcomes that are so devastating, and then they want to call people racist, which isn't helpful.
right. Definitely not helpful.
But I mean, it's the same process of having to find yourself, find a place to speak. And I think that another thing is curiosity. Like, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is what was constantly there for me in my commitment to change this picture was, what is in the way for people who are condemning and uncomfortable and all this stuff. Like, what's in the way? Like, what and what's missing, the presence of which might make a difference. Like, what would the door be that, if you could open it, that people could actually be open to a new way of understanding or looking at something? Like, those kind of questions, the curiosity that I was finally able to develop about what does it mean to move someone from one place to another? What makes change possible? You know, it's something I've been curious, because you've committed yourself to that, like, to make change, you know, to be who you are, to be very out there, to have people know you, you know. And what is it that you see making a difference today, the kind of difference that you're wanting to make, where people can see that you and other people are part of the community, are normal expressions of humanity, you know, like all that?
Well, the driving
Those-
force for me has always been the same since I was 20 something and first sat on a panel and got opened up and, like, you know, sharing my story. And that's love, like just being able to love people. And I've definitely, you know, hit spots in my life where I couldn't be that. You know, I definitely have had times in my life when I wasn't the one. And so every time I do find an opportunity to express myself, though, in that way, and doing my show in 2018, the Gender Reveal Party, you know, when I went off testosterone, that stuff just kept downloading in me. It was like I could not do that show. Like it had to be birthed in me. It was a creative expression that just had to come out of me. It was making me crazy. So I just had to do it. So then having the impact that I had in that show, when I have people who have never been awake before watch my show and come up to me and say, gosh, for the next week, I just saw gender everywhere. Like I'd never seen it before. It was like I didn't even see things gendered, and now they're everywhere. Like I just am awake in a totally different way. When that happened for me, it was like another opportunity for me to love, because I was just sharing myself and being everything I could be, you know, just telling the stories and making them laugh and being silly, but, you know, sharing myself powerfully. If I can make that kind of difference and shift somebody in an hour and 15 minutes, then I need to be doing that more. And it's not just my story that needs to be out there, it's other people. So, you know, for me, I'm always in this, I cannot maintain myself spiritually and emotionally if I focus on all the hate, and especially right now with all the trans kids legislation, I cannot. Emotionally, I cannot manage myself spiritually and emotionally if I focus on that. So I'm always focusing on what can I do then to just be the love and just be the information that people can focus on and talk about, rather than all the hate and everything else. So, and for me, that driving force has always been there, and it's just been to love the transphobia out of people.
Yeah, I mean, that helps me. Like what you did is, this had impact. I'm going to do more of that.
Mm-hmm.
This affected people. They can open up to this right?
Yeah, and I saw that when I was 25 years old.
Yeah.
Or 24. I mean, you know, when I went back to college, and the first time I sat on a panel and I started telling my story of being a suicidal youth and having people come up to me and, like, right away come up to me. And so I would say things like, because we were back in the day too, it was just gays and lesbians. Like I was the lesbian on the panel, right? And so I would say, now you know a lesbian. My name is Janet, and now you know my name. And so if anybody ever says I don't know a lesbian, you say, I know a lesbian. Her name is Janet. And I would say this to people because people thought they didn't know us. They thought the gay and lesbian people did not exist. And so back then, my goal was just to love them enough to have them be, and have them, you know, like share my story enough to have them be like, oh, they exist and they're right among us and we can love them. And so that, I mean, the very first time I ever shared that story and got that kind of feedback, it was like, oh, look at this. I can be loved and be great with these people. And next thing you know, they're knowing, you know. And then I also had the opportunity, because in that time on campus, Rock Chalk, I remember my very first National Coming Out Day telling my story in front on campus in Wesco Beach, like outside. And it was National Coming Out Day. And we were just all telling our stories. And I told my story. And that night I was out at a club, and I had this young woman grab a hold of my shirt, and I turn around and she says, "You're Janet Pryor." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I heard you tell your story today on Wesco Beach on campus." And I said, "Oh, good." And she said, and then I thought, if you can do that on Wesco Beach in front of everybody, I can tell my mom.
Yeah.
And I was done. Like, I was like, oh, well, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of I just knew right then and there, like, if I'm making that big a difference from just telling my story, we got to keep doing that. So
It's really great. It's really great, because I think when you're talking about allies, like, I had to be very strategic about, like, when I would have conversations with people, like, what makes a difference here? You know, when I was writing, I was committed to sharing people's stories, not by name, but the kind of story that I was hearing.
right.
That made a huge difference. So that that kind of storytelling went into everything I wrote.
Right.
But that workshop that you described, saying, like, it was kind of the opposite for me, because there were men in the audience when I would give these workshops. You could see that their whole attention, and it would get confirmed later, their whole attention was on, well, is she lesbian?
Right.
Well, she doesn't look lesbian.
Right.
So she looks awfully feminine to be lesbian.
Yes. Yes.
And sometimes they would be so bold as to ask me, like, I just can't, they couldn't stand not knowing.
Right. Right. Yeah. And now it's like they can't stand not knowing gender. I don't know if you saw my episode where I had Pega Jimenez on, and she has 2 children that she has not told the sex of to, and people just can't handle it. They're just, I can't handle it. It's always been that way.
Yeah, when my younger son was in like 10th grade, he had really beautiful auburn hair. It was kind of wavy, and he grew it long. He wore loose clothing, and people would come up right into his face, say, "Boy, are you a boy or a girl?" And he wouldn't tell them. And he would come home with these stories. He would play with people.
Mhm.
You know, like, he probably had an earring by then. And it wasn't because of, I always experienced him, I don't know, it just, like, it wasn't, there was nothing binary, nothing driving him about being gendered in the right way. But that
Right.
was he was born in 77, so that was probably 1990 when that was going on.
Yeah.
But so it's still going on.
Right.
People
cannot handle. Yeah, they just have to know. Yeah, because then they have to know how to treat it.
Right.
That's the thing. They don't know what to do with it.
I live in a retirement community now, and there's a woman who, I don't know whether it's a grandchild coming or a grandniece or a grandchild, but she found out the gender was revealed as boy, and the purple baby blanket she was knitting was going to have to be for someone else, because she couldn't give a purple baby blanket to the baby boy.
Why?
I know.
That doesn't make any sense.
No, I'm just saying, it's
like, 2022, oh my God.
And we're still,
I know we're still doing it, right? Yeah, I know. Still, this is why we're here. Yeah. So I want to make sure that people know how to get a hold of your books and how to get a hold of you, Ann Thompson Cook. Is it AnnThompsonCook.com?
There is I have a executive coaching website that I've just kept up.
Okay.
You can get more information about me there, and the materials we didn't mention that I ended up hooking up with a Black minister named Reverend Cedric Harmon. And we created Many Voices, which is a Black church movement for gay and transgender justice.
Nice.
So I got back into the church work because it was sort of like stepping back 30 or 40 years because the work hadn't happened there.
Right.
And Reverend Cedric was extremely, do we have a minute for me to
Oh yeah,
tell
we
you
got
this?
plenty of time. Yeah.
So DC had brought up gay marriage, and a Black bishop had come to the city council and said the Black church is never going to stand for this. And Reverend Cedric and the dean of Howard Seminary, Divinity School, and another minister got together and said, no, we're not going to do it like this. And Reverend Cedric went all around all 8 wards of DC and talked to ministers who were involved with justice issues and asked them to either support or to stand back from the gay marriage thing. And he had these amazing conversations where people would say, well, I can't do that. I'm working on a school to prison pipeline, or I'm working on affordable housing. And Reverend Cedric would help them see that Black, gay, and transgender people were the most impacted in those very areas. They were in more trouble than anybody in the community. And then they would start getting that. And then they would say, but how could I say, like, what if people say, how can you be a Christian and support that? Or what about the Bible? And he would just work with them and walk them through. And so he got a group of Black pastors. Some of them said, well, I'll just stand by, I won't oppose it. And others came into the city council and were gracious to the bishop. I mean, he had already shown how powerfully effective he was with the Black church. So we created this Black church movement. And of course, he was doing the work, I was doing the background work, and we worked together on the writing, because that was, which made it fun for me.
Sure.
So where the guides are is at manyvoices.org.
There you go.
In the shopping area, which so we made Black church versions. So the most updated guides that have my name on them are Black church versions of the sexual orientation and the gender. And then we created a bunch of cards that I love.
Do you want to show them to us?
I have a couple. One's called The Bible and LGBT. Can you see it?
Yeah, you can. That's beautiful. We'll also put, we can put these in the show notes and put links.
Yeah, one's about God, one's about something else.
Nice.
But when a Black, gay, or genderqueer or trans person would see these, like, they would read it and then you would see tears, because these materials were the first time they had seen themselves in anything related to gay or transgender.
Yeah.
So that's been very powerful. But I have been trying to figure out if any of your viewers know how to help me get these things on Amazon. Like, they were on Amazon, but then Amazon changed the way it does its marketplace, and I haven't been able to get them up there. Not that I'm still working. I retired a few years ago, but that's kind of one of my one of the things I can't let go until I succeed at that.
There you go.
Because people are looking for them.
100%. Yeah, and they're such important. That's such important work. The God stuff is so powerful. Yeah. Thank you for doing it. And thank you for being here. I love you so much. I'm so grateful to get to introduce my audience to you. You're also just one of my friends and mentors forever. We're 20 years apart, and I love that. I love that. Thank you for being in my life. Any last words you want to share with our audience?
I never felt like I was a mentor. like
Oh,
that
gosh.
that I just don't even recognize. So I'm glad if you learned something from me. I've certainly learned a lot from
Oh
you.
my gosh. Oh, yeah. I learn from you every time I talk to you. So I appreciate you so much. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for listening to the Gender Reveal Party podcast. I hope you loved it. And if you did, would you take a second and go do all the things like subscribe, rate, review, tell all your friends? Apparently, if you do that, the podcast platforms are more likely to share it. And if you think these stories are important, please take 3 minutes to just go do that. I'd really appreciate it. Also, I'd love to connect with you on social. On Instagram and Facebook, I'm at the Gender Reveal Party. And on Twitter, I'm at Pryor J. It's a real joy and privilege to bring you this podcast. Come back soon. Love you, bye.